If there is one resource which has proved its utility over time when it comes to cracking civil service exam, I would say it's just Hindu newspaper. An aspirant who cracked the latest exam in 2023, as well as someone who had cracked this exam 50 years ago, would just have one thing in common, and that's the daily habit of reading Hindu newspaper. So yes, technology has brought a lot of awareness about what's happening in the world to your fingertips through your mobile phone. There are apps to digest the day's news in a single shots, but whatever it is, the habit of newspaper reading is something irreplaceable when it comes to civil service exam preparation, because Hindu newspaper can be replaced with multiple other sources, but the philosophy with which you spend this 2 or 3 hours every day reading Hindu newspaper cannot be replaced with anything else as a substitute. So this is a video which actually is an answer for the question that many aspirants tend to ask me about, sir, what's the right strategy to read newspaper? So how should I be even reading Hindu newspaper on a daily basis? Which pages should I even read? I would say that don't worry about all of these, just worry about what's the reason behind why you read Hindu newspaper. I think once you have a concrete answer for this question, you will not be hesitant to spend all the time it takes to master a day's newspaper. So to begin with, let me tell you, the only difference between a civil service aspirant and somebody who casually takes up Hindu newspaper to know about what's happening around them, I think the fundamental difference is a civil service aspirant also has to use 2 other tools to read newspaper, whereas somebody who is just occupied in some other profession, who would simply want to casually read newspaper for an hour or half an hour every day, would not need those 2 tools. So what are those 2 tools? One is previous year's question paper, the other one is syllabus sheet. So every civil service aspirant who really understands how to best make use of Hindu newspaper will have a clear idea about how to link all these 3 aspects together. First is previous year's questions, second is the syllabus sheet that UPSC has given when it comes to mains preparation, as well as newspaper. It's only when you know how to integrate all these 3, your reading of newspaper becomes very effective. All right. So let me tell you why by giving you an example of a recent test which I have conducted based on Hindu newspaper. Once we go through these questions, you will be able to understand my philosophy of why I say all these 3 aspects should be linked together. So as you can see on the screen, we have a couple of questions here. So this is on 21st of August, we had a recent test conducted, so in which there were some objective questions, and it also followed with reading comprehension passage type of questions, followed by 2 mains questions. So if you can spend the next 10-15 minutes trying to understand this question paper, you will be able to make sense of the utility of Hindu newspaper, right? So starting with the first question, why was this framed in the first place? Okay, porpoising is a behavior that's generally seen in, and there are 4 options given. So why have I even framed this question in the first place? It's because when I look at previous year's question paper, in the last prelims, there was a question asked about a particular dance among the bees, which is called as the waggle dance. Okay, so there was a question asked about a particular method of communication between the bees. So waggle dance is used by bees to communicate maybe the presence of food in the neighborhood. So UPSC is very fond of asking about all these mechanisms through which different life forms interact with each other. So once I get a sense of that, now when I look at news, though the news on the right side of the screen, you will be able to see an article on dark oxygen discovery in the depths of ocean. So basically, what's this dark oxygen? For a long time it was thought that in the oceanic depths there is no possibility of oxygen existing, but recent researchers have figured out there are trace amounts of oxygen which are even present in the oceanic depths. So where do these oxygen even come from? It comes from what are called as polymetallic nodules, right? So this is a common theme that's known to most aspirants who prepare for civil service examination. So we know that there are metallic deposits which we find on the ocean floor. But what scientists have recently figured out is that these metallic nodules, they are able to hydrolyze water. So because of which, when you hydrolyze water, when you break it into its constituent parts, oxygen is released, isn't it? So that was the recent discovery made. So the entire article discussed about polymetallic nodules. It discussed about the steps taken by different countries across the world to tap this resource of polymetallic nodules. And while discussing it, the article also mentioned about the risks, the environmental impacts of this particular activity. So the environmental impact was mentioned that it has a potential to affect cetaceans. So cetaceans are whales, they are dolphins, right? So it is such organisms which are called as cetaceans. So the article only talks about just whatever I have discussed until now. It doesn't talk about this behavior called as porpoising. But when I start looking at this particular article, my mind starts linking it with previous year's question. And in the previous year question, since UPSC has asked about waggle dance, which is unique to bees, similarly now when I start looking into the details about cetaceans, I also come to understand that these cetaceans exhibit a behavior called as porpoising. So I am sure all of us are aware that whales and dolphins, they surface at regular intervals, right? You would have seen all those videos where you find a whale rising up from the depths of the ocean. It comes over the surface, it makes a jump, and once again it dives into the water. So such kind of behavior is what is called as porpoising, right? So it's an opportunity that this particular news has highlighted this aspect of behavior of cetaceans before me, and it's now my responsibility to know something more about it, right? So this news, though it doesn't directly mention about porpoising, it actually brings to my perspective about the environmental impact of this particular phenomenon, and it's my responsibility now to go and read something beyond this. So this is why I say the difference between somebody who prepares for civil service examination is they simply don't read the news, they start making use of the news, whereas a casual reader of Hindu paper would simply be contented with just reading the news alone. There isn't anything much to do beyond this for a casual reader of Hindu newspaper. So once you understand this basic philosophy, every article that you read in Hindu newspaper will become a ocean mine for further reading. So it's this further exploration, it's this curiosity and inquisitiveness to know beyond what is actually mentioned in Hindu newspaper. Once it's ingrained into your daily habit of reading Hindu, I'm sure you will be able to figure out the language with which UPSC communicates to you. I'm sure you'll be able to understand the pulse of UPSC. You'll be able to understand why UPSC asks a particular type of question. So that's why I say you have to always have a touch with previous year's questions and also have a constant look at syllabus sheet. You need to figure out which part of this newspaper is linked to which part of syllabus sheet. So it's only when you start doing these two aspects along with the habit of reading newspaper, your time that you spend is much more meaningful, it's much more effective, and it's going to reward you in both prelims as well as in mains, right? So all these questions that you find before you are based on the news that came in the newspaper, but it's not simply a direct copy paste of the news. There is a further reading that has to be done so as to get these answers right. So now let me discuss about the second question. The second question discusses about the different operations carried out by the Indian Army on the left side, and on the right side you have the different reasons why these operations were carried out. So it's basically a match the following type of a question, right? So why have I asked this question? It's because in the last year UPSC has asked some 2-3 questions regarding armed forces. So it's a trend, that it's a hint that UPSC gives to us that keep your eye on all news related to armed forces, about army and operations and all of that, right? So it is in this context when I read newspaper on August 20th, there is a news that General S. Padmanabhan, who led the army during Operation Parakram, passes away. Okay, so that's a very valuable piece of knowledge which I can gather from this news, right? So now my responsibility is to know what is Operation Parakram. So, and not only that, it is in this year we also have a lot of troubles in our neighborhood. For example, the recent issue is that in Bangladesh, the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she has just fled the country, and there's just so much of turmoil in Bangladesh right now. And we should go back to history, and you'll be able to understand that India played a very, very significant role in helping Bangladesh, in helping the Bangla-speaking population get their independence from Pakistan, right? So we had army operations carried out in Bangladesh as well, and so have been so many other operations which have been carried out in so many different instances. So the point I'm trying to say here is, as a civil service exam aspirant, you cannot simply limit yourself to only this particular news which has come in the newspaper. So that's why it's an incentive, it's like an impetus. The news article is just giving you a sense of direction to proceed from here. It's not the end, it's just a means to achieve greater knowledge about similar such operations carried out by our Indian Army. So this is the philosophy that's going to help you crack prelims. So you should know that cracking prelims is simple if you only know the right ways of searching further from the news that comes in the newspaper, right? And similarly, look at the third question. It's another interesting question which I have framed regarding 4 different types of fibers. So you may ask me, why is this question even here? The reason is I was inspired by an article written by Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. It's an editorial piece in which she had pointed flaws with the government actions in making amendments to the flag code. As per the latest amendments to our flag code, we can have Indian flags made out of any fabric, but whereas in the original flag code, which was earlier there, you can only have Indian flags made out of khadi, because khadi symbolized our national movement, isn't it? But Mrs. Sonia Gandhi was pointing flaws in the latest order of the government, and she was even pointing it out how Chinese made polyester fabric is being used for making Indian flags. So she was pointing out how flawed the policy of present government is when it comes to the promotion of khadi industries, because in our directive principle we have the promotion of khadi industries as a priority of the state, and this is an action of the government which is diametrically opposite to that directive principle, right? So all these aspects were discussed in this news, but when I saw that, oh, polyester is actually imported to in India, we are not even self-sufficient polyester, and China has been our large supplier of polyester, so that now makes me think about what is polyester, right? So when I start browsing further about polyester, I get to understand about a concept called as man-made fibers. Now my thought is stimulated about what else comes under the category of man-made fibers. So this is how further exploration, it's like a seed of thought has been planted because of a news article, but a big tree has to grow out of the seed, and it's our responsibility to water it with our efforts. Water the seed with more browsing, more searching, right? If you spend 15-20 minutes on this particular idea, right, you get educated in different ways, right? So I hope enough has been mentioned about your approach and your perspective on how to utilize Hindu newspaper from the perspective of prelims. Now coming to 2 other aspects. One is, I am very fond of utilizing Hindu newspaper to improve my English, right? I believe that my proficiency with speaking, with writing, all of that should be credited to a consistent habit of reading Hindu paper. It's because the kind of essays that I used to write, the way I used to segment essays into smaller parts, all of that I should say as an inspiration from the way editorials used to be written. And learning new words, enriching our vocabulary, knowing in which context a particular word has to be used, all of that happens from a daily habit of reading newspaper. The way an article is introduced in the newspaper, the way the first opening lines of any article, any editorial is written, it's how your introduction is going to be sentenced when you write your mains answer. The way after the entire editorial is discussed, how does it conclude? What kind of sense of closure does the editorial give you? That's exactly the way how your conclusion for your mains answers have to be written. So just understand that there is no other resource for this exam preparation which is going to be useful across all the 3 phases, from prelims, mains and personality test. The way Hindu newspaper can turn out to be useful for you. So when your philosophy about the utility of newspaper is very clear, you would not be hesitant to make the best use of Hindu newspaper. It's only when you approach Hindu paper with a piece of information that I have to simply memorize, when you start approaching paper with this outlook, then reading newspaper becomes a daily burden. It's something like one more activity to be simply ticked, and it's not going to be a source of bettering yourself, right? So that's why your philosophy of how you approach newspaper plays a greater part in whether you make use of Hindu paper for cracking this examination or not. Because everybody knows English, anybody can read 3 or 4 words, anybody can read and understand what's written in 10 sentences. So then there shouldn't be any problem amongst aspirants. So no aspirant should even come up with this question as to how should I read Hindu newspaper. If still then they are coming up with this question, it means that they are not able to figure out how to utilize Hindu newspaper. They know how to read, but they just don't know how to utilize Hindu newspaper, but they are not able to word the question correctly. So they just simply come and they keep on asking around, how do I read Hindu newspaper, right? So now coming to the two other parts with which Hindu newspaper can be used for. One is reading comprehension, and let me tell you how can you make use of Hindu newspaper for improving upon your reading comprehension skills. So if you see question number 7, this is basically a passage which I have simply extracted from Hindu newspaper. So it was an editorial piece in which the growing inequality between different sections of the people were all discussed, and especially in this particular passage, the author seems to be accusing that the rich, the elites, after they build capital, they are able to influence the system. They are able to capture the entire system, use it for their advantage, use their money to bribe, to corrupt politicians, and to build further wealth. So that seems to be the accusation in this particular passage. So all that you need to do today, especially after you have ChatGPT in your hands, is simply copy this Hindu News article, paste it in ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to simply generate 3 or 4 options, right, and try to choose one among them, whatever is correct or whatever is incorrect. Keep this as a practice. So when you start doing this on a daily basis, I'm sure your reading comprehension skills are going to be greatly sharpened. And it's only when you can really have good reading skills. So that's the gateway to read good literature for your optional subjects. Unlike general studies subjects, which can actually be read from NCERT level textbooks, from basic textbooks like Lakshmikant, becoming great with your optional subject requires a certain proficiency in reading of English as well. It's only when you can sit and read complex passages, complex ideas for a sustained period of time, only then you will be able to master your preparation for optional paper. And not only that, you need good reading skills so as to clear CSAT paper. And many aspirants tend to fail in CSAT paper even though they are very decent with their general studies knowledge. There are aspirants who get more than 100 marks in GS paper and still fail to qualify in their CSAT paper. And so why does it actually happen? It happens because they were not able to score decently well in reading comprehension questions. They would be focusing on mathematics part, hoping that whatever they get right in mathematics is like a short question, right? You get an answer in maths question right, it means that you can be at full peace of mind that you have scored a mark in that particular question. So many aspirants, they tend to focus on mathematics part, ignoring reading comprehension aspect, right? So that's why and UPSC will make it a point to ensure that you are good with all different parts of your CSAT paper. You cannot simply qualify CSAT only being good with maths, nor can you simply qualify CSAT only being good with reading comprehension. You need both the skills, a decent ability in both the areas. So how do you improve on this reading ability? How do you improve on the speed of reading a passage and coming up and choosing the right option among the 4 options given? I think the daily training can be done from the newspaper, right? Because the level of English that's written in articles like the one that you see on the right side on the screen, Great Expectations, Liberalism in Dark Times. So this is an article which actually talks about how liberalism has been affected by different policies of different governments across the world, and how dictatorial authoritarian regimes are facing the heat because of election results, just like how we can see that the BJP's outcomes has actually reduced in the 2024 elections. Their seat share was lesser compared to the previous elections, right? So this is the idea that's actually pointed out by this writer. But let me tell you, this article is not a very easy read. You cannot simply read and comprehend it in one go. You have to make twice or thrice, you have to attempt it twice or thrice, read it to make entire complete sense of this particular article. So when you read for 2 times or 3 times and with the idea to comprehend what is the message of this article, I think that's what builds the stamina of reading. Okay, and over time, the 3 attempts that you initially take to make sense of this article will definitely reduce to 1 or 2, right? So that's how you can organically, in a sustainable manner, you can actually improve your speed of reading. And a follow-up test that you can do. Okay, let's say I have finished reading this entire article. Now what I do is I'll just simply copy a part of this article, paste it in ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT to generate a reading comprehension based question, and I'll just practice it on a daily basis. So that's a very powerful method on how you can work upon your reading comprehension skills. So this is also another significant utility of Hindu newspaper in sharpening your reading skills for this exam preparation. So it's like cracking this exam requires 3 levels of layers of skills. First is your reading skill, over that is built your writing skill, and over that will be built your speaking skills. Okay, so building all these skills happens just from this 10 rupees or 8 rupees worth of Hindu newspaper that you purchase every day. Okay, now coming to the last part of this discussion, another very great utility of reading Hindu newspaper is to build in you very reasoned, rational arguments over any particular issue. And every social question, every political question, they don't have very clear answers. It may help in benefiting one particular section. A policy of the government may help in catering to one particular section, but it can end up doing harm for another particular section, right? So every policy of the government, when it comes to questions of socio-political nature, they have two sides to it. So where do you get exposed to both sides of this argument? I would say it's the Hindu editorials, because the same issue can be written by two, three writers. On one day you may have a writer who completely supports a particular government policy, but that will be countered and a rebuttal will be given by another writer probably the following day. So it's when you read both these articles, you get very reasoned out opinions on this particular issue. And this kind of an approach, this kind of an attitude is very important when it comes to 4 subjects: polity, society, international relations, as well as in economy. And it's for these 4 subjects, most of the questions asked, the difficult ones that you find in your mains, will be of the critically examined type. They will be the critically analyzed type of questions. So how do you find answers? Where do you find points to address the demand of the question? It's basically from the Hindu editorials, right? So on the right side in the screen, you can find that there's an article written by Mr. P.D.T. Achari, who was earlier a Secretary General of Lok Sabha. This particular editorial, he discusses about certain recent happenings concerning political parties. It's basically a news about Enforcement Directorate wanting to file a case against a political party, Aam Aadmi Party. So while addressing this particular question, he brings into our perspective about the different issues surrounding political parties. We have seen political parties which incite communal violence in the minds of people, and political parties are a very favorite route for a lot of corrupt people to channelize their black money and to make it white. So political parties have been floated for every possible reason other than to fight elections these days. So that's why there is a strong need to regulate political parties. And when you read this article, you get some insights on the different sections of law which can actually regulate these political parties. We have Representation of People's Act 1951, and there are very specific sections like the section 29 of RPA, which is a presently existing mechanism to regulate the conduct of political parties. So you get to be exposed about the different mechanisms, how you can keep a control on political parties when you read this particular article. But this is not the end of it. You need to think, what more can I learn about this particular article? So how do you get to understand about that? That's when again you have to look at the previous year's questions. Go look at mains questions. You'll be able to understand UPSC has asked 1 or 2 interesting questions regarding the regulation of political parties in the previous years, right? So that gives us a hint that you need to prepare more on political parties. There are so many deficiencies with respect to the present mechanism through which we tend to control political parties and their affairs. And various bodies in the past have given very interesting recommendations which are yet to be implemented. Okay, so where do you get hold of these recommendations? You have to go search for Election Commission's recommendations. You have to look for Law Commission's recommendations. This is where a role of a faculty also plays a role. It's only a faculty who is aware of previous year's questions, the trend of UPSC, will be able to point a direction for you to go and search if in case you do not know how to search beyond this particular article. It is on this basis I have even framed this question number 9 that you can see on the left side, right? So this is exactly the language in which UPSC will be framing a question in the upcoming year, since this has been an issue which has figured in the news. I think this was like a very important news, because a party has been taken to the court by a government agency because the agency wants to sue the entire political party itself. right? So it's a very what can I can say as a legal conundrum, right? So that is what makes it a very attractive area for UPSC to frame a question in the upcoming year, and that's why we need to think about what possible question can UPSC possibly ask. So going back to previous year's question, priming your mind as to the direction in which this particular issue can be taken forward by UPSC to frame a question, right? So when you start on this journey, that you have read a news article, you have read other resources as well to make better sense of this article. When you have finished this journey, you will be able to frame these kind of questions yourself. I'm not saying on the very first day when you start reading newspaper you will be able to frame these kind of questions, but over the longer run, with your other activities of looking at PYQs, previous year's questions, and all of that also going in parallel and in tandem, I'm sure you will come to a point that before you even give mains, you will be able to anticipate UPSC, you will be able to create similar kind of questions which UPSC probably would be doing in the upcoming year, right? And this is the way how topper's mind works. This is how people who crack this exam will look at a particular news. They look at a news from its question worthiness. They look at a news as to find out what more areas to search so as to be ready with answers if at all a certain type of questions can be framed, right? So anybody who has put in 2 or 3 years into preparation and who has clearly understood the knack of UPSC questions, the way the questions are framed by UPSC, I'm sure each one of them will be able to frame all these kind of questions in their mind, right? So it's not that they're going to face questions for the first time in UPSC examination, but they themselves have made all these kind of questions for which their mind has already found answers, right? So I hope each one of you can imbibe all these practices as a part of your daily preparation. Number one, understand that newspapers' utility goes beyond awareness of current affairs. It helps you in shaping your perspectives. It helps you in sharpening your reading skills. It helps you in understanding what would be an impressive way of writing an answer. It helps you gather right vocabulary, and it also teaches you how to use the right vocabulary in the right places. So without development of this ability, your essay papers cannot be very impressive, nor will your optional papers also be impressive. So knowing that this is all the different use cases of Hindu newspaper, do not look at newspaper as a daily activity to somehow be finished with, but look at Hindu newspaper as the starting point of your day's preparation. I'm sure once you change your outlook towards Hindu newspaper, reading paper will become a very interesting activity. You will simply not be able to spend a day without reading newspaper, and that is exactly what toppers are made of. In fact, I should say that when I interact with a lot of aspirants who who I chance to meet during the times of personality test preparation, all of them make it a point to at least spend time with 2 newspapers. They read Hindu newspaper as well as Indian Express articles. If not the entire newspaper, at least they make sure the 2 editorials from 2 different newspapers are done and completed for every day, right? So if that's the competition, I expect that you would also rise up to such standards.